I'm here with Sam Whitney, who recently gave a presentation for Arbinger titled "Don't Hold People Accountable, Develop Accountable People." Sam Whitney is our Associate Director of Global Development here at Arbinger. And Sam, it's so good to see you today, and I'm thankful that you've taken the time to talk with me. In our chat, we had thousands and thousands of questions. I mean, the chat was just whirring by during your presentation. It was really engaging. And some of those questions I wanted to take a minute to pause and focus on and just get your expertise and your experience and answer a few more of those questions that we got from our viewers today. So I'd like to start with this question. How do we get everyone involved when they are resistant to being accountable?
That's a really good question, Sarah. I think that when it comes to rallying collective accountability, part of it starts as a leader of taking accountability for my impact on the group. But we have a great tool. It's called the Biggest Headache Tool. And the Biggest Headache Tool, what we do is we gather a group of people together, and each person takes turns actually saying what their biggest headache is currently. And then others, while that person's speaking, think about ways they can be helpful given the resources that they have. And so the biggest headache, what's great about that in terms of accountability is as people realize that their biggest headaches most of the time have to do with other people. Most of the time have to do with the flow of resources and information amongst team members. And so people begin to realize, number one, that, hey, everyone has challenges and it seems that everyone's challenges are related to each other. And number two, they begin to become creative around how they can be helpful to one another. Accountability doesn't necessarily require me to throw down everything I haven't done right and just, bare my soul to be accountable. I can invite accountability simply by having people begin to think about each other's work, and from there begin to build accountability together.
Well, that kind of leads into this next question is, what if there's an issue with mindset? How do you get someone to change their mindset so that they're more focused on impact?
I think that much of the time when people are focused on outputs rather than impacts, or when they're inward rather than outward, often that's a function of the fact that they just don't know about their impacts. So we need to make sure as managers we've communicated clearly our expected impact in that role. Many times when we're hired into jobs, no one talks about the impact we should be having. They just tell us what we should be doing and when we should be doing it. But we also need to communicate clearly to those we hire, those that are currently on our teams. Look, I expect you, for example, to manage our finances, but I expect you to do it in a way that's helpful to other people. And then to set up meetings with that individual to be thinking about the impact they're having on others, to invite them to go learn about their impact on others. Just like I said, many times impact isn't built into the job description. So if we can build it into what it means to have a job, mindsets will naturally start to turn more outward. And hopefully people will become more impact-oriented.
Well, what if, and here's another question that I think is related to that, what if they're not doing their job? What if there's discipline required? How does discipline play into this accountability conversation?
That's a great question. I think the first step is to question myself as a leader. That question is coming from a leader, of course. You have someone you need to discipline within the organization. So, I would say that the leader needs to take a hard look at themselves and understand and think about, have I communicated clearly my expectations around impact on this role? If I haven't done so, then the person's, the actions they've taken may be partially my fault. I may not have communicated well with them, and it may not have made it clear what I expected, what I wanted, and they may have taken actions under assumptions without proper information. So I need to make sure that I have communicated clearly. If I've done that, then I think it's a matter of approaching that individual and starting with them, just like we looked at with an outward mindset in the webinar. Let's think about their needs, objectives, and challenges, and let's get very curious about why it was they went about and did the thing that they did. Why did that make sense to them? We may discover something within their rationale that's perfectly justified in doing what they did, and we may need to make adjustments as leadership or as an organization to be more helpful to them and avoid that problem in the future. But also by asking why, we may uncover that there was something more serious going on or something that we needed to correct more directly. And just, I can't tell you exactly what to do in every situation when it comes to discipline and accountability. But what I can tell you is that by creating a space for these kind of conversations, you're much more likely to get at the heart of what's going on and find solutions more quickly.
Thank you so much, Sam. Now, one of the questions that came up a number of times in your presentation, you talked about intrinsic versus extrinsic motivation. I'm going to trip over those words a little bit, it's a mouthful. Or personal incentives versus material incentives. We got a number of questions about that and your commentary on that. Can you point to any studies that talk about this? You mentioned the studies in your webinar today. Can you point to those studies and talk a little bit about them?
Yeah, of course. So one of the sources that I pull that from is actually an analysis of the research that's been done in that field around organizational psychology. There's a great article on HBR called "Does Money Really Affect Motivation? A Review of the Research." That's exactly the title. Type that into HBR, you'll find it. It's a review of the larger body of work that's been done by Harvard and by others, but essentially synthesized for you. So you can look at the studies, see the results very quickly, not having to read through a bunch of studies. But yeah, that's where I would point you.
So one more question for you, Sam. Another question that came up multiple times is holding ourselves accountable and validating that. How do we confirm that we are being accountable to ourselves versus just kind of feeling like we're being accountable to ourselves?
That's right. That's a good question. Well, one of the litmus tests that I like to say is if I'm uncomfortable versus comfortable. If I feel comfortable in my accountability, I'm probably not being accountable enough. Because I'll generally resist, I think people generally resist transparency at the deepest levels. It's hard to be straightforward. It's hard to be honest at times, particularly when we have failed. And so I think if it's causing me discomfort, I'm probably on the right track. That's one litmus test. The second one would be, I can't be accountable in a vacuum. Accountability is a word that refers to other people. Accountable to whom? If I were the only person alive, I couldn't be accountable. And so I need other people in terms of my accountability. So I need to think about, who am I accountable to? Am I accountable to a manager? If I'm a president or CEO of a company, am I accountable to shareholders, to the public, to the government in some form? And how do I think about, am I accountable to those people? Am I having a positive impact on those people? And if I don't know whether or not I'm having a positive impact, well, then I need to go ask. So I think if I'm uncomfortable and I'm actively asking people about my impact and I'm thinking of ways to be more helpful, then I could probably say with relative accuracy that I'm trying at least to be accountable for my actions and my work. It may be impossible to be 100% accountable all the time, but at least I'm creating the conditions in which I can achieve that more often.
Sam, thank you so much. This has been really a helpful conversation, and I think is going to be fulfilling and edifying and useful for those people who submitted all of these many questions. It's a pleasure to have the opportunity to talk with you today, and thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Sarah. Great to be here.